You stand in a chamber sealed against the night, a place meant only for the eyes of a king and his queen. The air hangs thick, unmoving, as if the room itself is holding its breath. Shadows bleed across the walls, thrown by candles that flicker low, their wax spilling in slow, mournful streams. The scent of crushed roses mingles with something sharper, copper on the tongue, wrong in this place of silk and ceremony. The bed is the center of it all. Draped in white earlier this evening, it now carries a dark, spreading bloom, red where there should be purity, vivid as a wound refusing to close. The stain reaches outward, a slow invasion, soaking through threads woven to mark the beginning of a dynasty. She sits there, still crowned, though the weight of it seems cruel now. Her hair falls loose where careful hands had pinned it only hours ago. Her gaze is somewhere far from the chamber, but her trembling fingers give her away. Clutching at the sheets, as though she might pull the night back into something clean. Across from her, the king does not speak. His face is carved into stillness, but his eyes fix on that bloom of red as though it is a prophecy written for him alone. Between them, the silence is not empty, it is heavy, crushing, alive with the knowledge that no door can keep this inside. Servants will whisper. Courtiers will feed on the story. Enemies will forge it into a weapon that cuts deeper than steel. Beyond these walls, the great hall echoes with laughter. Cups are raised. Songs are sung. They believe the marriage is beginning as tradition demands. But the truth is here, in this locked room, in the color that has already begun to haunt the crown. One night. One bride. One stain that would echo through centuries. But the real question isn't what happened. It's why history refused to forget. The year was an uneasy one, caught between wars that had ended and wars waiting to begin. The kingdom's borders were quiet on the surface, but tension breathed beneath them, rival houses watching for weakness, foreign courts waiting for a reason to test the strength of the crown. The king's throne, carved from oak darkened by centuries of rule, was steady in appearance but fragile in truth. His father's reign had been a dance between victories and humiliations, and the son inherited not only the crown but the debts, the grudges, the whispers that a younger, hungrier ruler might seize what was his. The king was not yet old, but the lines at the corners of his eyes were not born of age. They were carved by council meetings that stretched through the night, by alliances bought in coin and blood, by the constant knowledge that one misstep could undo him. He was shrewd, but not warm. His smile was rare and, even then, calculated. To those beyond his court, he appeared untouchable. To those close enough to know better, he was a man constantly measuring the ground beneath his feet, or where it could vanish without warning. The bride was chosen not for love, such things were luxuries in palaces, but for the power her name carried. She came from a lineage older than the king's own, a family whose wealth was measured not only in gold but in the reach of their influence. From her earliest years, she had been groomed for this role, taught to speak in 3 languages, to move with the grace of someone born to be watched, to conceal every thought that might betray her. She was a political prize, yes, but also a gamble. Her family's power was both an asset and a threat, a reminder that the balance between queen and king could tilt in ways dangerous to both. In this world, a wedding was not a private bond. It was a public contract, binding not only 2 people but 2 realms of power. Every detail carried weight. The dress was not merely fabric but a declaration of alliances, the embroidery telling stories to those who knew how to read them. The procession was timed to align with ancient omens, the feasts arranged to display wealth without inviting the envy of those who sat at the table. And when the sun sank and the guests drifted to their chambers, there remained one final act the court demanded, proof that the marriage had been made complete. It was a tradition older than the stones of the castle itself. In the morning, a sheet would be displayed discreetly to select witnesses, marked with the blood that would confirm the bride's purity and the consummation of the union. It was a ritual both intimate and political, meant to silence any who might question her virtue or the legitimacy of heirs to come. Without it, rumors could grow like rot in the beams of the palace, eating away at its strength until it collapsed. She would have known this. Everyone did. From the moment the engagement was announced, the expectation would have followed her, in the way the servants looked at her, in the way the court ladies spoke with smiles that didn't touch their eyes. On that night, the weight of a crown was not only on her head, but on her body. And the knowledge that failure, in whatever form, would be remembered far longer than her name. You're hearing a story most people will never discover in a textbook. If you're watching and haven't subscribed to Tale of History, you're letting stories like this fade back into silence. Is that what you want? It was called a union of destiny, though the truth was far less romantic. The match was born not from affection, but from necessity sharpened to a blade's edge. The king's advisers had pressed for it with the quiet urgency of men who knew the throne could not stand alone for much longer. His enemies were patient, some across the sea, others across the banquet table, and they would wait for the moment when his alliances thinned enough for them to strike. This marriage promised to bind the crown to one of the most powerful dynasties in the region, sealing a treaty that would bring military support, trade privileges, and, perhaps most importantly, the legitimacy of ancient bloodlines interwoven. The negotiations were long, tense, and never without the bitter taste of compromise. The dowry was the first battlefield, not merely the wealth that would change hands, but the terms of its use. Her family wanted it to remain hers, a silent reminder that her loyalty could be recalled if the crown betrayed her. The king's council wanted it absorbed into the royal treasury, a show that she had been folded entirely into his rule. In the end, the documents signed were crafted with deliberate ambiguity, their words pliable enough to be twisted by either side when the time came. There were other fractures beneath the silk. The bride's household followed a faith with rituals unfamiliar to the king's court, and while outwardly tolerated, these differences lingered like unspoken accusations. Ceremonies were adjusted, symbols quietly removed from the wedding preparations. The king's chaplains whispered that such accommodations were dangerous, that bending for one tradition might break the spine of their own. As for the couple themselves, their interactions before the wedding were brief and measured. To the public, their portraits showed two figures perfectly matched, regal, composed, carved from the same noble stone. But in private, witnesses noticed the pauses. He was quick to dismiss her questions in council, she slow to meet his gaze for longer than etiquette demanded. There was no open hostility, yet there was no warmth either. It was a marriage set in motion like a wheel that no one could stop, even if both riders knew it would roll them toward a cliff. Court rivals circled the match like vultures around a feast. Some whispered that the king had been coerced, others that the bride's beauty was meant to distract from her family's political ambitions. There were murmurs, too, about her health, a fainting spell during a public appearance, hands that trembled during long audiences. Nothing that could be proven, nothing that could be spoken aloud without risk, but enough to plant seeds in the minds of those who wished the marriage ill. History has shown that such unions, forced by politics and laced with quiet resentments, rarely remain unshaken. Decades earlier, another royal match meant to end a war had dissolved into a public scandal when the queen's inability to bear an heir led to her annulment and exile. In another kingdom, a marriage forged for peace ended with the bride's mysterious death, her body found in chambers locked from the inside. Alliances, after all, were fragile things. And the moment they failed, every smile exchanged in public was remembered as a mask. If you can sit here hearing secrets kings tried to bury and still not subscribe, well, you're giving the past exactly what it wanted, your silence. Are you really on their side? The day rose golden, as if the sun itself had been summoned to bless the union. Bells rang from the highest towers, their iron throats sending peals across the city until the streets quivered under the sound. From the palace gates to the cathedral steps, every surface shimmered with embroidered banners and gilded finials. The air was heavy with incense and the smell of fresh-cut flowers crushed beneath the feet of the procession. The bride arrived beneath a canopy held aloft by 6 noblemen, her gown a marvel of craftsmanship that seemed almost inhuman in its perfection. The fabric was so heavy with gold thread it pulled at her shoulders, the jewels at her throat biting into her skin with every step. Beneath the veil, her face was painted to radiance, but in the space between each slow, measured breath, her lips pressed into a thin, almost imperceptible line. Every movement was deliberate, rehearsed, and watched. The cathedral's great doors opened to swallow them into a vault of shadow and candlelight. Choir voices rose, ancient hymns swelling beneath the stone arches until even the highest vault seemed to tremble. Priests in layered vestments moved through rituals as old as the throne itself, hands raised, oil glistening on fingers, words spoken in a tongue few could understand but all were taught to fear. And through it all, the eyes never left her. The court's gaze was a living thing, hundreds of them, fixed, unblinking. They studied her every gesture, from the angle of her head as the vows were spoken, to the way she reached for the king's hand. Somewhere in the crowd, the king's rivals watched not for beauty, but for weakness. Somewhere else, her family's enemies marked the same details for use when the tides turned. When the vows were done, the day did not ease. It swelled into a banquet that seemed to stretch beyond the hours. The tables bowed under the weight of roasted game, spiced fish, candied fruits, and flagons of wine that caught the candlelight in deep, red pools. Minstrels played, jesters capered, and poets recited verses so carefully flattering that they seemed almost like veiled warnings. The king raised toasts again and again, each one echoed by the hall in perfect unison. Yet from the far end of the table, the bride lifted her cup with a measured hand, sipping little, smiling just enough to keep the room from asking questions. Perhaps it was the heat, stifling beneath layers of fabric and metal. Perhaps it was the endless weight of knowing she was as much on display here as the silverware and gold plate. But beneath all the music and splendor, a quieter current ran. Every courtier knew that the true conclusion of the wedding was not the feast, nor the dance, nor even the king's final toast. The night itself would be the final test. It was tradition older than many of the walls that surrounded them, the proof of consummation. In some courts, it meant a stained sheet displayed discreetly to witnesses, in others, a whispered report from trusted attendants. Here, it was a ritual performed without shame, or mercy. The chamber would be prepared, and when morning came, the evidence would be laid bare for those who ruled by blood and law to see. No stain, no legitimacy. No legitimacy, no union. The music swelled once more. The bride's smile held, but the flicker of unease had already settled in her eyes. We dig this deep so you can see the past without the lies they wrapped it in. But if you don't hit subscribe, you'll leave this channel at the mercy of the same algorithms that prefer cat videos over history. The feast had ended, the laughter and music trailing away into the long corridors of the palace. Attendants with downcast eyes guided the royal pair to the chamber prepared for them, a room swathed in silk, warmed by a brazier's glow, and perfumed so heavily that each breath felt weighted. One by one, the servants withdrew. They loosened the bride's crown, unpinned the layers of her gown, and folded each garment with the ritual precision reserved for relics. The king, already stripped of his ceremonial armor and robes, dismissed the last of them with a flick of his hand. The door closed. The latch slid into place. In the silence, the glow of the candles turned the walls a deep, liquid gold. The air was thick with the perfume of roses, but beneath it, a metallic tang had begun to rise, faint, almost imperceptible. She stood still for a moment, her head bowed, her hands tight against the folds of her shift. The king approached, his voice low, his movements deliberate. What happened next has been retold in whispers for centuries, though never in the same words. Some say it was fear, the body rebelling under the crushing weight of expectation, the strain of standing hours in the heat, the pressure of knowing the eyes of an entire kingdom awaited proof by dawn. Others claim an illness had been brewing in her blood, a hidden weakness that chose this night to reveal itself. Still others point to the wine, that final goblet pressed into her hands by a smiling courtier whose loyalty lay elsewhere. But what all accounts agree upon is this: at some point, the tension broke. Her body gave way. And in that moment, silk, flawless, pale, shimmering in the candlelight, bloomed with a dark, spreading mark. It happened too quickly to conceal. The king froze. She staggered, her breath ragged. The sound of fabric shifting was louder than either of them dared to speak. By the time she pressed her hands to it, the damage had already soaked through. Outside the door, the first to see was a chambermaid sent back for more candles. She stopped cold at the threshold, her eyes wide. She backed away into the shadows before the king could speak. Moments later, the royal physician was summoned in a hushed voice by a guard who did not dare knock but dared not stay silent either. The news moved through the servants' wing like a spark on dry straw. By midnight, the chamber's secret was no longer theirs. By dawn, it would no longer belong to the palace alone. You're now one of the few who know what really happened inside those chambers. If that's not worth a click on subscribe, maybe tell us in the comments why you'd rather keep the rest of this buried. The door to the royal chamber became a barricade, not just of wood and iron, but of secrecy. Servants were ordered away. The brazier was stoked higher, as if heat alone could burn away the shame. Fresh linens were brought in wrapped under thick curtains, and the soiled silks were bundled with shaking hands, hidden in a chest that would never be seen in public again. The king's steward dictated the first version of the night story. The bride had been overcome with fatigue after the ceremony, she had fainted, been laid to rest, and nothing more. Physicians were instructed to confirm this. The guards at the corridor swore they had heard nothing unusual. But court silence is never complete. A single maid, pale and trembling, had whispered to a kitchen boy that she had seen the stain. He told a scullery man. Within an hour, the lowest corners of the palace hummed with the tale. The colors of the stain grew richer in every retelling, the size greater, the meaning darker. By morning, the official statement was already competing with another, one carried in the folded letters of rival courtiers. Some suggested the bride was unchaste before her marriage, the proof laid bare before the king. Others claimed she was cursed, her body marked as a sign from God. Still others whispered she had been poisoned by those who opposed the union, the stain a physical mark of their treachery. Enemies in the court, those who had long feared the power this marriage might bring, saw their moment. They fanned the rumor subtly, not by shouting but by questioning. A raised eyebrow in the council chamber, a pause before addressing the queen, a remark in the ear of an ambassador. Every gesture was fuel. Even now, records survive. Letters between ambassadors describing an incident of great embarrassment to His Majesty, chronicles from rival kingdoms hinting at a dishonor staining the very sheets of the royal house. None give the full account, but each adds a sliver of proof that this night was more than idle gossip. Curtains could hide the silk. Whispers could bury the truth. But in the game of courts, lies are never enough to kill a story. The marriage bed had been meant to bind two kingdoms. Instead, it became a fault line. Within weeks, the king's demeanor toward his bride shifted, not in public, where his gaze still lingered on her in the court hall, but in private, where the air between them grew cold. Their conversations thinned to formalities. The warmth expected of a newly joined pair was replaced with a politeness so rigid it felt like the etiquette of strangers. Behind palace walls, the stain became more than a mark on silk, it was a mark on their union. Some in the court whispered that the king no longer trusted her, others believed she despised him for failing to defend her against the rumors spread. Beyond the palace gates, the impact rippled outward. Envoys from allied states began sending cautious letters, asking if the alliance was still sound. A marriage built on unshakable trust had been promised. What they saw instead was a story of dishonor creeping through the corridors. A single rumor could weaken a treaty, and here, the rumor was woven with humiliation. At court, factions hardened. Those loyal to the queen accused the king's advisors of orchestrating the whispers. Those loyal to the king muttered that her family had brought a curse into the royal bloodline. In the Grand Council, decisions slowed as private suspicions poisoned public duty. The stain, once hidden in a chest, became a wordless weapon. In disputes, rivals would lower their voices and murmur, "Do you really want to trust a crown that cannot keep its own bed clean?" The phrase lodged in ears like a thorn, each repetition deepening the wound. Years later, long after the silk had rotted away, enemies still found ways to resurrect it. Court poets, loyal to opposition houses, would slip sly lines into their verses about purity spoiled and honor bled. The linen was gone, but the metaphor endured, unkillable. If you've stayed this long, you clearly care about keeping history alive. If you're not subscribed yet, I can only assume you're fine with letting the kings win twice, once in their time, and once now. Centuries later, the question still hangs in the air like incense that refuses to fade: was the stain a shame, or a strategy? Some historians believe it was nothing more than a tragic accident, the result of illness or exhaustion from the relentless demands of ceremony. They point to letters written by palace physicians, preserved in brittle parchment, describing the queen's weakened constitution and delicate digestion. Others argue it was a carefully laid trap, an act of sabotage by those who had everything to gain from breaking the alliance. A misplaced cup of wine, a powder dissolved into a ceremonial toast, a whisper to a servant whose loyalty had been bought in gold, the possibilities multiply when examined under the cold light of politics. The chroniclers of the age could not agree. In the writings of one court scribe loyal to the king, the event is painted as a divine omen, punishment for the bride's hidden sins. Another, aligned with her homeland, describes her as the victim of palace treachery, writing that her dignity was undone not by her body, but by the venom of men's designs. Modern scholars study these accounts not only for the facts, but for the biases they reveal. In every version, the stain becomes more than silk and thread, it becomes a reflection of the storyteller's loyalties. Gender plays its role here. In a world where a woman's worth was tethered to purity, any mark upon her was enough to mark an entire kingdom. Morality, too, bent the retelling. In pious circles, the stain was a warning against pride. In satirical pamphlets, it was mocked as proof that even crowns cannot guard against the body's betrayals. Each retelling was less about truth and more about wielding the moment to serve the teller's cause. The real question, the one you now carry, is not simply what happened that night, but why it was remembered at all. And that answer may tell you more about history's hunger for scandal than about the truth itself. The centuries did not wash the silk clean. Painters in dimly lit ateliers would recreate the scene, not with accuracy, but with the flourishes their patrons demanded. The bride became a symbol, her downcast eyes immortalized in oils, her gown captured mid-bloom with a crimson shadow that seemed to glow against the pale fabric. In the ballads sung by wandering minstrels, the tale shifted yet again, the stain became a curse, a prophecy, even a love story gone wrong. In the political pamphlets of later reigns, the event was sharpened into a weapon. Rivals would whisper that the royal line had been tainted from its very wedding night, using the memory as proof of weakness, unworthiness, or divine disfavor. The court poets, when it suited them, would twist the moment into metaphor, a reminder that the throne, no matter how gilded, was still draped in human frailty. And as kingdoms rose and fell, the tale endured. Not because it was the most important event of its age, but because it struck at the core of power's illusion. That rulers are untouchable. One private moment, a handful of witnesses, and the whisper of silk could unravel alliances, tarnish crowns, and leave a legacy as enduring as any law or treaty. It is here, in the shadows of such stories, that you see the truth: power does not fall only to swords or sieges. Sometimes, it is undone by a single night, and the memory of it. If you have walked with me through every chamber of this story and still have not subscribed to Tale of History, then you've chosen to stand where the kings and their courtiers stood, guarding the past in silence. But if you click now, you join those who refuse to let truth fade into the dust. And so we return to the chamber where it began, the air heavy, the silk transformed, the crown itself seeming to lean under an invisible weight. The stain was never just cloth. It was a mark that spread beyond the bed, across the corridors of power, into treaties, into songs, into the very way history weighs a woman's worth. For the king, it was a shadow that lingered behind every public smile. For the bride, it was a prison she could never step out of, no matter the years that followed. And for the world beyond those gilded walls, it became a story too tempting to forget, a reminder that even in the most opulent courts, one night could rewrite everything. We tell the stories they wanted erased. If you walk away without subscribing to Tale of History, ask yourself, when the last storyteller is gone, who will speak for them? Don't let this be the last time their voices are heard.